could be useful.
Hello.
All right.
What was I laughing at now? Oh yes, that crippled Irishman.
Now, when I first heard about Bitcoin, I thought, what an absolutely wonderful idea. Limited number of Bitcoin, which cannot be hacked, cannot be altered by the banksters. You know, what isn't there to like? And then over time I started to see that it actually is all mathematical, and if it's all mathematical, then it can't be free of influence by the banksters, etc., or governments. And really that was just by doing techniques from a guy called D Gann, although it's my interpretation now, going back to the 1920s. He died in 1955, so way before there was meant to have been computers. I believe it was all being manipulated. Now, I've done a couple of videos on this because what I like to do is I like to show you that I don't say things with the benefit of hindsight. What you'll find off, well, everybody I've ever seen, is they'll show you something after the event. Now obviously that's convenient because obviously you can't see what's happening into the future. So what I always try and do is go back to a video that I've done in the past and just basically show you that what I said still applies to the future. Now this is a list of videos that I've done, and I've got to show you this way because one of them is unlisted, and I think it's not there. Okay, it's this one here, and you can see that it's unlisted. Okay, so the only people who can see it are people I actually give the link to. Now it was a public video and quite a few people watched it, and the first 75% of the video is perfectly fine, which I'm going to insert into the video now. But the last part of it, I made an honest mistake, and because it worked so incredibly well I just assumed it was correct, and then when I tried to reproduce it on a chart later on, I realised the mistake I'd made. I got one digit wrong, and then what I did was I apologised in this video here. So the video that I did here, I did on the 2nd of July 2019, and you're going to see in a minute when I put it back in the video that there are certain angles that I had on the chart, and then I apologised in this one here, which I did on the 8th of October 2019, and showed you how it really worked with the correct percentages on. So you can go and check those two videos yourself. Well, you got not the first one, but you can check the second one, which is public, which is Gann's Great Discovery Part 7, and I'll reintroduce the Part 6 bit into the video now. Now what I've been trying to show you in these videos is that the markets are all just basically controlled, and you're being played as suckers, and you can predict the future from what happened in the past. Now each individual item has different movements, therefore it'll work in a different way, but what people want is a simple rule that allows them to make trades. So a good example of that would be, say, the Elliott wave theory, things retracing 0.618 or 1.618 of a movement. Obviously far too simplistic, and in my opinion it doesn't work. In fact, I use my knowledge, because that's how I started doing this in the very early 1980s, because there was no Gann books or anything at the time, so you couldn't go down that path, and at the time I thought it was great. Never made any money using it, but it all sounded very mystical and all very interesting, but you know, I don't think it works, and that's not because I've just come to that conclusion overnight. It's because I've done it, been there. Okay, but it does sound very, very interesting. Okay, now like I said, everything works in its own unique way. Now people like Gann angles. Now, as I've told you many times, if you have any software whatsoever that does Gann angles, then I can guarantee to you it does it wrong, and then I'll use this magical word, the master time factor, and then your minds will go into overdrive and you'll come up with all these strange, weird and wonderful things, but in fact it's so incredibly, unbelievably simple. If I told you what it was, you'd be incredibly disappointed. But I've done a video on this in the past, doing angles, and over time you kind of work out how something actually works, and like I said, you work out the future from what happened in the past. Now this was the major high on Bitcoin. Now mathematically, why did Bitcoin just recently top out here? Now you can see all these movements. Now there was a big spike up here, and then it had the big movement down before we started to have the rise. Now let's find out what it was actually made on. So if I do auto angles between that high and the top, you'll basically see a list of numbers, and it tells you basically mathematically which is the closest angle. Now here it says it's an 11 by 52 gamma, and if we put that on, then you can see that it goes right through that top. So let's say that we only started doing Gann when the market, or my interpretation of Gann should I say, it's nothing really to do with what Gann said, because Gann wouldn't use this number. Now this number is based on the odd number of 9, and it's the master time factor, which I call gamma. Okay, so a point to watch in the future would be half that number. So if we halve that number, then we get 576. And lo and behold, where does the market stop? Okay. Now, let's see what happens if we add that number, 1152, to 576. Well, if we add 1152 to 576 and divide it by 2, then we'll get the number halfway between the two, which is 864. And if we put 864 on, can you see that the market stopped there? Just showing that it's all mathematical and you're being played as suckers. Okay, now I'll make that a weak line because it's halfway between two, and it's really a hindsight thing, that there. Okay, just to basically show me that, you know, that something's happening here. So that's a base 9 angle, and that's a base 9 angle with a master time factor of gamma. Okay, so probably the obvious thing to do in the future to watch would be, just so, let's say they only started doing Gann when it broke through that angle and you've seen it with hindsight. Well, if it worked on that one and it worked on that one, and halfway between the two stopped the market here, then what would be worth watching in the future? Well, let's halve that. Half of 576 is 288, and where did the market top out? It stopped at 288, which is based on the odd number of 8s, because if you keep dividing that number by 2, eventually, sorry, the 9, if you keep dividing that number by 2, eventually you get to 9. If you keep dividing that number by 2, eventually you get to 9. If you keep dividing that number by 2, eventually you get to 9. So 1152 divided by 2 is 576, 576 divided by 2 is 288. So obviously it might be worth watching 144, because 144 is half of 288. That isn't a prediction. I'm not saying it's ever going to get there. It is if it ever gets there. Okay. So this seems to be working on 9s. So we can do things in the past. Now I've done a video on angles on all these movements just using the normal numbers I would normally use. But let's just put some. Now you need to know about cutting angles and when to stop following angles, otherwise you can just fit lines in all over the place. So okay, so if we look at these numbers, okay, there's a base 9 which you can't see off the bottom of the screen, right, which is this one here, which is 288. Well, 288 is that number that just gave us the high, and you can see it's not a trend line because it's a set number based on the odd number of 9. If you were doing trend lines, then eventually you would move it to give you that low there. Now if we put a trend line in between there and there, it's in a completely different position and it does absolutely nothing. That's why trend lines are rubbish. They're wonderful with hindsight. You can always do this with hindsight, but it's of no practical use in the real world. Okay, it's all mathematical. So we can look at, for the future, half that number, which would be 144. Now although it didn't last very long, where did it stop? So it's having a really fast fall. It gets to the base 9 angle and it stops. The next one below that one maybe would be 72, but you can see that it went up before it got there. So what we could try is, I showed you that halfway between this one and this one was this one. Now 864, if you keep dividing that number by 2, eventually you'll get to 27. Before, you can't divide 27 by 2 without getting a decimal place, so that's based on the odd number of 27. So let's add 144 to 72 and divide it by 2 to get halfway, and you get 108. So let's put 108 on the chart and see what happens. And lo and behold, I'll make that a weak line because it's halfway between halfway. Lo and behold, mathematically it shows you why the market bottomed out at that level. So the same numbers that are working from that previous low are also working on the way up. So how can we use that as the market stands at the moment? Well, if it's working on 9s and it seems to be working on 27s sometimes, that one and that one, then maybe it might help us to find possible places at which to buy. Now again, these are just decision levels. It can just go through the level. I'm not saying it's going to stop at this level. So for example, if I was to add that to that, okay, then you would get that, and you can see that when it got to it, it's a decision level, and I'd be watching it, but you can see that's a day. So on the day it gets there, it just goes straight through it. I'm not saying I'm going to do it, I'm just saying it's a place to watch. And then of course we would use our percentages to try and find places where these numbers coincide at the same place. So what we'll do now is we'll zoom in, okay, and if this is working on these numbers, then you know, again we can use auto angles and look for a base 9, and gamma, and I can't see one, so we can try 27s because that seemed to work. If I do a 27 by 1, that's there. And now you can't do half of 27. 27 by 1 is here. Okay, now half of that would be a 27 by 2 because you can't divide 27 by 2 without getting a decimal place. So that's how you actually do it. So that would be a place, but you can see it's not really been of any use to us. Okay, and actually sorry, that's completely wrong. I've got the wrong master time factor. So let's try that again. 27 by 1 would be there. See, it's a lot flatter. If we double that, we get 54. If we double that, we get 108. If we double that, we get 216. If we double that, we get 432. Okay, and you can kind of see that it did actually trade up it, and if you change the scale, you probably find that that isn't actually too bad. And that one there, if I do a base 9 and just see if we get anything. So 144 is one we've been talking about, 288 is one we've been talking about, and 576 is one we've been talking about, which is too high. Now you can see that when it broke, so I didn't see that basically based on 9s. Now if you can see that when it broke through that angle, I cut it. That means I can't draw any angles from there, from that low. Okay, so eventually you have to draw them from here. So we do the same thing. So we do, if it's working on 9s of course, because everything works in its own way. So one that goes up at 9 points is 2 flat. If we go 18, which is 2 9s, it's 2 flat. 36 is 2 flat. And if we press page up a few times, eventually get to 288, which we've been talking about. Twice that is 576. Okay, so they begin to look about, you know, 30, 45 degrees ish, but it's got nothing to do with 45 degrees, etc., which you might have heard. So let's make that the normal line. So because it's done 9s in the past, maybe it could be worth watching in the future. Twice that number is 1152, and lo and behold, what happens? The market low was made on 1152. If I do twice that, I can't have that on. Can you see that the actual prices broke through the angle? So it's too steep, so I wouldn't have that on. Okay. Now we also found that halfway between this one and this one, yeah, has been working in the past based on the odd number of 27. So it would be 864 but drawn from this low. And if we put 864 on, we get that. Now I've made it a weak line just so I know that it's halfway between halfway. Okay, so they're just decision levels, and as I've shown you in the past, one of Gann's big numbers is when things fall 50%. And if, and it's an if, yeah, if it was to fall 50%, yeah, and it was to get to this angle, which it's not going to do, yeah, or it was to get to this angle and 50% here, it could be a point at which to look for a change in trend. But unfortunately, it isn't that simple. Now, to draw the steeper angles than the 1152, I have to draw them from there. So if we put on 1152, it's obviously the same angle. If we double it, we get 2304, and lo and behold, what did the market trade up? It traded up a 2304. Now, what's halfway between 2304 and 1152? Well, we've been saying that it's based on the odd numbers of 27, so that's going to give us 1728, and that would be a level to watch in the future. Now, because just so I know it's halfway, I'd make it a weak line, but lo and behold, where does the market stop? Now, another item might work in a completely different way, but the rules are the same. It's just different numbers and different odd numbers, and you just try and find patterns. So because of what's happened in the past, these are going to be places which I'm going to be more interested in. Okay, now let's go back here. So I'm going to give you a challenge, just in case I drop dead at some stage in the future. I don't want all this to be lost, but I'm not going to give it away unless you become a client. So why did the market bottom out here? Now, Gann, on the way down, as I've shown you in a previous video, would watch Gann's major number of a fall of 50% from the high, and as you can see, it's pretty good. Okay, you can see that the market showed resistance. If we take this high here and we take away 50%, you can see that it gave the low. Now, if you look at the very first video that I ever did on YouTube, which, whatever it was, 2013, 2012, I showed you the very first thing that I ever found worked from a Gann point of view. This is not because it's mystical, which I used to believe back in the 80s, yeah? This is because it's controlled. It's because it's all mathematical, okay? So for instance, when the market starts to go up here, I would add 50% as a place to watch for a change in trend, and lo and behold, the market stops at 50. But it doesn't always work at 50, so if I go to this low here and add 50, it didn't quite get there, so you wouldn't quite do it. But it would be a place where you'd be looking for the market to turn, yeah? But it might just go, you know, if I go to this low here and add 50%, you can see that when it got there, it just went straight through on that day. Yeah, the decision levels, and you improve your chance of being right by finding out from different tops and bottoms where certain numbers coincide at the same place. Okay, so this high here, I'll be watching minus 50%. Now it works for about 3 days, yeah, but you ain't going to make any money if it only works for 3 days. And again, we can, you know, add 50% to this low, but it never gets anywhere near 50%. Forget that. Okay, when the market goes below where you did the level, you cut it. Otherwise, all you get is lines all over the place. Yeah, and you'll just fit things in to see what you want to see. We have a high here, so I would be watching on this one incredibly simple rule, and I must stress it ain't this simple. Okay, it's just the very first thing that I ever found worked. So I'll be watching 50% from this high, and it does work. It stops at 50%. Yeah, it stops and has quite a big move for 3 days. But again, are you going to make any money out of something that doesn't last? The hard bit is finding big movements where the major changes in trend actually physically take place. Okay, so that's just using a very simple rule. Okay, so here's how the chart looked in the video I did from July 2019, and it's now the 24th of June 2020, so almost a year later. So this is what it looked like, and let's see what happens. So the market comes down, and at this stage all I can do is take away what I call Gann's major percentages, which he wrote about in the 1920s, 30s. So 33 1/3 is one of Gann's major numbers, and 50%, which is what the very first YouTube video I ever did was about, which was probably, I'm guessing, 2003 maybe. So basically the next major number of Gann's is 66.6, which is twice 33 1/3. And you can see that his constant number that he talks about then, as I said, stopped the market. Anyway, what I've done is I've drawn an angle coming down here. What is that angle? It's this one. It's an 1152, a base 9. Keep dividing 1152 by 2, eventually you get to 9. And you can see that the first reaction is made on it. Now if I were to do trend lines, what most people do, it would be there. Okay, I'll make it a weak line. It would be that line there if you do an exact trend line. Let's see what happens in the future. When it gets to the exact trend line, it just goes straight through it, but the angle, which it doesn't actually physically quite touch, happens to be where the market stops. Yeah, and then what people then do is they take off the trend line and then they line it up with the new top, which is there, which again I'll make a weak line, and you'll see in the future it gets to the 1152, which is the base 9, but misses the true trend line. And that's why trend lines are basically just following hindsight. That's really what you're doing. You can see here that I wouldn't be interested in this. This is based on 27, which we discussed in the video I did a year ago. It's a trend line. I've gone from here. It's a set number, but once it's worked once, anybody with a ruler can get that line. The same with this one. From here through here, that's a set angle, but once that low has been formed, it's then a trend line, so I wouldn't be interested here. Okay, so we come down, and this is half of that, which is still a base 9, and you can see that it doesn't quite get there. I'm waiting for it to get there to make some kind of decision. It stops, yeah, and then it breaks through, but you can see it's just a set number. Next one, 288, is the one I'd watch in the future, which I discussed, which you see it doesn't line up with that low there. It's just a set level to watch. Now I've just gone a little bit too far, so I'm going to show you now a video that I did when the market was a little bit, it was the next day, which is the market was about here, and I'd already said that it was worth watching this level here, 50%, because it's Gann's major number, and on Bitcoin it worked quite a few times in the past at that number. But I basically removed the signal and said that it was going to reach 51 point something or other based on what had happened in the past. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stick that video in to show you that I'm not making this up. And as of today it looks like that, and it's getting quite close to 50%, which is just a major Gann number that I always put on the chart, and then there's some other numbers that isn't really a top, but I've got 33 1/3. That's a division of 75. Yeah, so I don't particularly like it. From this high here, there's nothing. 33 1/3 is too low. Okay, so you know, I watch it, but I don't think I want to do anything. But as I keep saying, this is a scam. Yeah. Now the client sent me his chart, and he correctly pointed out that this base 7 percentage, 35.714. Remember, any number you divide by 7 in the second number, or a division of 7, you always get 71428 or 1428 or 4285714 recurring forever. Okay, so 5 divided by 14 was the rise from this low to this high. Okay, you know, that's just a number that happened. However, if you go to the next low and you add the same number, it's exactly 35.71428 again. Okay, coincidence. Now let's go to this low. How far did it rise? Once again, 35.71428. Now, you can say that's just a coincidence, or you can say it's manipulated. I've come to the conclusion that it's manipulated, okay? Because that's impossible if this is freely traded by people buying and selling because somebody wants to buy it and somebody wants to sell it, and there are billions of, well, millions and millions of people all trading this, okay? That is impossible. Okay, this is the one that I did eventually, and it was all about making an assumption about this number here might work in the future. So that's what I said on the 22nd of November, and I showed you the levels that I already put on the chart. So you'll notice if you scroll back a little bit that there was dark lines and there was medium lines and there was weak lines. And basically, the more information you've got, the easier it is to work out what's going to work in the future. Now, because when I did the original video, all I had was this fall here, I couldn't work anything out because I had no lows to work out future lows. So from these, I could work out the future. So those two predict the next number, and the next number is this one, and although it doesn't last, it's exactly where the market was made, which started to give me confidence because I did this when the market was actually here. Now from that, it then predicts the next one, which is this one. So that's a little bit more than the 50% level that I was watching originally that I said I didn't like. Okay, now because that's between, what I tend to do is I make it a normal line, so I call those strong lines and I call those weak lines. And then the next one in the series of these strong lines is this one. Now the reason I like that one is because from these other tops things coincided at the same level. Now I had some other levels on which I won't bother putting on, but they just basically just fell straight through all of those. But that was the level, and you heard me talk about it back from a year ago, that was the one that I wanted to work, which was minus 70% from that high. So market comes down, it gets to this level, which is actually the level that was on, that I put on before it got there. Okay, and it happened to be exactly the low. The important thing is, some people have been asking me for the basic introduction to Gann webinar, and then basically a little bit of knowledge is a very dangerous thing. And I got an email, an email, I think it was yesterday, who tried it on some of the stocks that he looked at, and he said that it was pretty good and it was giving him lows, but some of them got broken by a little bit. It's because a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. And yeah, I decided I wasn't going to use 50, I was going to use 51.857, which is actually what actually did work. Yeah, then it comes down to it again, and it reaches that base 9 angle, which I talked about, which is not based on anything. It didn't make a low on it here, it's no kind of trend line. Yeah, but you can see that it worked. Yeah. Then we get to the base 9. If I said base 7 there, I think I might should. That's a base 9. That's a base 9. Now I've got other angles on, yeah, but it makes it a bit more complicated, so I won't go into that. But although it didn't last very long, it actually worked, and you would have put it on before it ever got there. And then we had the big fall. How far did it fall? Let's cut that. It fell to 70%. Then what happened? That, by the way, is a base 7, 72, base 9. 72 divided by 2 is 36, divided by 2 is 18, divided by 2 is 9. You can't divide 9 by 2 without getting a decimal place in the number. Yeah, so based on 9. So we had a very, very fast fall in an incredibly short period of time. That is actually an incredibly strong sign. Yeah, when things rise very fast, it's a very weak sign. You're getting near to where they're going to take your money off you, basically. So what's happened since? It was the bottom, and as of today it looks like that. And by using these tops here, I've got some levels that I'm watching into the future, which I've done a video on, but we'll see what happens. Now if we take that high and we take that one and just see, looking for base 9, which you can't see. Bear with me. So that's 1152 with the wrong master time factor. Okay, so that's that one I'd actually draw from the highest place. Yeah, because he doesn't break. Okay. Now, although it didn't work, you can see something slowed it down, and I would say that that is the angle. Twice that is 2304, another base 9, which is what the market traded down. Now we can do exactly the same thing on the way up. So let's do 1152 rising, and twice that is 2304, and you can see that it's where the market, it's what the market traded up. Yeah, it's now getting very trend liney. I wouldn't buy there because that's definitely a trend line. Yeah, and then we fall through the trend line, so a lot of people who do technical analysis would start shorting. That's a daft time to do things. You usually find that when you break through a trend line, the market has a small recovery to basically catch out the people who basically do technical analysis that they've been taught by other people who read it in a book, who haven't looked to find out if what they do actually works. Okay, so it's really to show you that a little knowledge is a very dangerous thing. Okay, just because I show you something that Gann wrote, yeah, it doesn't mean I always use it, because I don't. Okay, that was the number that I was watching for. Yeah, not the number in the basic Gann webinar that I did in 2014. Yeah, which is 50. It worked. Yeah, but working and making money isn't good enough. You've got to get the exact turning points so that you can have a close stop loss, so if you're wrong you can make a small loss. Where the angles comes in is you've got a level that you're expecting to work, and you've got an angle, so it's giving you the time when to do something, and that's actually where the market had the big movement. But it doesn't always work. You can see here half of that, it just went straight through. Great, that's exactly what I wanted to do if it's not going to work. Yeah, so I hope you found it interesting.